Hello, everyone. This is Judith Briles, and you're back for another episode of Your Guide to Book Publishing. Author U is one of our sponsors, which is a membership organization for authors who want to be seriously successful. Also, kudos and thanks to Nick Zellinger, a graphic designer, awesome cover designer, and you can find him at nzgraphics.com. And then there is the amazing Rebecca Finkel, who not only is the cover and interior designs, but we're talking about awesome swag and websites. And you can find Rebecca at fpgd.com. So I always like to start our kickoff with our program with my quote from my little book, Snappy, Sassy, Salty Success for Authors and Writers. And because we're going to talk about a lot of things with our guest today, but I'm going to make this really short. So it's beginning and dumping, starting again. It's what we authors do. And with that said, I'd like to introduce you all to this many times before. He's a marketing whiz. He was one of the brains behind the kickoff of AOL a gazillion years ago. And I have to say, Dan, it's one of the few systems my friends who still use it have no problems with it. No hacking, no nothing. It's like it's like Tamax. It just keeps on ticking. So with that said, Dan works with businesses and healthcare executives who want to write a book that can transform their businesses. He serves as a developmental editor and a book coach. His website is writeyourbookinaflash.com, and we're going to talk about don't letting your book die in you, getting it out. And the sooner the better. I mean, Dan, you may have new stats, but it's like 83% of the population says they have a book in them. They want to write a book. Now, I always say, should you? Maybe it shouldn't come out. But if it is, there are some rules and unwritten rules in the process. There's some savvy tools you need to have in your hip pocket as you go forward. And so we're going to jump into some of those things that you can do and not do. Blunders we want to see you avoid, but we want you to be successful. So, Dan, welcome to the show, and we're going to play.
Great. That's great to play with you again, Judith. Thanks for having me on your playground.
Yeah. So, you and I both have a hat. I'm a developmental editor. You're a development editor. Why don't you throw on the table what your version of a developmental editor is?
Great. Not only are there different kinds of developmental editors, but people have
Mm,
different specialties in developmental editing. There might be a
yeah.
healthcare developmental editor who knows medicine backwards and forwards. There might be a
Mhm.
leadership developmental editor who knows all the latest trends in leadership and management and business. And that's probably where I
Exactly.
fall in. Um, and it's important to find the right kind of developmental editor who understands what you're talking about. For instance, if you're writing a tour guide book, I'm probably not the right person for you.
Oh.
And that's okay. So ask a few people around, like, do they know your topic? And obviously, you're going to know your topic better than any developmental editor will.
Hmm.
Do they have
Hmm.
some basic knowledge, some experience in that area? They may have a great deal of experience, but again, you're the expert, you know what you're talking about. So a lot of people wonder, like, what is a developmental editor? They know what a copy editor does or a proofreading editor does, but a
Hmm.
developmental editor is really the first person you should talk to when you're writing a book because they can
Yeah.
figure out where and work with you along the structure of the book to see what's going to sell today in today's marketplace. In fact, I
Hmm.
just finished a developmental edit with a client who sent me his first chapter. And it was very interesting because his branding was all off. It didn't match his website at all. So sometimes you're so close to your subject, don't see the forest for the trees, as the as the old expression goes. So he
Hmm.
thanked me very much for that. He also had parts that were missing from his first chapter. We didn't know who he was. So there was no signature story, there was no background. We didn't know how to didn't know him, didn't trust him, didn't know anything about him. So that's something that he thought he had gotten in there because he told a couple of stories, but it really didn't relate to the story that made him passionate about his topic or showed the experience of his topic. He also missed things, rookie mistakes like who is this book for and how will they benefit from this book. And again, you think, in fact, it was in his outline. This is the funny thing. It was in his outline, but it was not in the first chapter. So sometimes you can be blind to what you know, because I can't proofread my own stuff. So I'm not criticizing my client at all, because we all need someone else to look over our shoulder and show us what works and what's not going to work. And that's where a developmental editor can get in. And the best time to work with them is at the beginning of the process. But I've also had people talk to me after they've already written the book and they want me to go through the book and see if it really works, if the stories flow, if there are enough stories, too many stories. I worked with one guy who'd already written his book. He was an HVAC contract, that's heating, ventilating, air conditioner. These guys are geniuses. I mean, you have to be a scientist to understand all the gases,
Today, yeah,
electronics, and
today, yeah.
these are highly skilled people. And he wanted to write a book that would teach these people how to run their businesses effectively, because they may be rocket scientists, but that doesn't mean they're good accountants or marketers. So I read his book, and it was a good book, but he had stories in the wrong chapters. He had a story, say, about ethics that really belonged in the gratitude chapter. I mean, it was obvious to me it was just misplaced. So you need
Mhm.
someone to come in. He had the same story twice. You're
Which we
blind
see,
to it.
yeah,
And that's where a
which
developmental
we
can come
see,
in at the
yeah.
beginning, the middle, or the end of the process.
Mhm. Yeah, I see very similar in a lot I do. I can tell pretty quick if they can write, because that's the other thing. A developmental editor may have to say, this is a great story, great story idea. The concept really, I think, is relevant. But, and I've said this, but you're a sucky writer. That's not your skill.
Mhm.
And that's when you may have to bring in somebody else. Now, it could be maybe the development editor can do it. That I've had to take over some of those, but then we have to work so hard to maintain your voice and whatever quirkiness is in it, whatever little nuances are there, all of that to maintain that it is your voice, but just your skill set is not writing. It's just and it's not going to be for a lot of people. In fact, that's why ghost writing is out there. It's why it's why most celebrities never write their own book. Would you not say, Anne? I don't know how many
Yeah.
celebrities have actually written their book,
Well,
much
well,
less
well,
read it.
they don't have time to write their own book. They make too much money per hour to write their own book. I mean, if you're a real estate person making thousands of dollars an hour, it's malpractice to write your own book. You should hire a ghostwriter because you could do better with your time selling stuff instead of writing. But getting back to developmental editing, I'm surprised at how many people can write well. I'm working with a
Mhm.
former athlete now, and you think, athletes are athlete. No, he's a
No,
smart guy. Smart guy. But I wasn't sure if he could write because he was sort of self-deprecating and such. And I wondered. And he sent me his first chapter, and I have to tell you, blew my socks off. He just
how
wrote
fun is that?
beautifully. Short sentences, long sentences, mixed them up. I'm not sure he even knew what he was doing because he said, I'm really not sure about this. I'm really not a writer. I'm really not comfortable with this. And I read it,
Mhm.
it's like, wow, this is really, really good. And
Mm.
I said, every writer has doubts. We all question ourselves, even me. And I have degrees in journalism from Northwestern. I was a newspaper reporter. I wrote more than a dozen books that have been translated to 6 languages. I still have doubts. And I said, if you don't have doubts as a writer, then you probably are an incredible egomaniac who thinks that you are totally perfect on everything. And that's a different kind of problem. So having some self-doubt is good, and having a book coach or developmental editor look over your work and say, hey, you're a lot better than you think. Keep on
Mhm.
writing, keep on going. You don't need a ghostwriter. You can do this yourself with just some coaching and some feedback and keeping you on the right path and keeping you to, on a deadline. So you get your book done on schedule. So those are some of the beauties of working with a coach or developmental editor.
Right. Well, I think as the combination, the book coach, the developmental editor, I think one of our jobs is to make you look better, your writing look sharper, and bring it together. So, and I always love it when an editor has been involved, and yet the reader who knows the person can say, "Gosh, this sounds just like you." I love that. when that comes across.
Yeah.
So there is a connection. So our goal, the editor, a developmental editor, maybe be your first stop, and
Yeah.
instead of bypassing it, which I think
Mhm.
is going to be more inclined what people will do, they will bypass it and think what they need is the proofreader now immediately.
Yeah, well, that's like building a house on sand. If you don't have a firm foundation, your house is going to fall apart. So you could be writing the
Hmm.
wrong book and think you're writing a great book, but it's the wrong book at the wrong time because you don't know the market or you're too confident about your writing abilities. I mean, my new client, I'll give you another story. I don't think this will embarrass him. He said, I wrote this chapter and I'm really not sure of it because it just doesn't have a lot of validity to it. And it was a lot of his opinions. It was about addiction and recovery of addiction. And he said, it needs more substance. But his writing was good. I mean, if he was doing this as a high school auditorium speech, it would knock the socks off. But I read through it again. I said, okay, here you have, why don't we talk about the cost of addiction? So if you get a DWI, how much does that cost? What does a lawyer cost? What's the fine for driving DUI? What if you get into a car accident? What's that going to do to insurance rates? What's it going to do to your to repair your car, let alone
Hmm.
the damage you've
Hmm.
caused to the body of yourself and the other people in the other cars or sidewalk and pedestrians. So that was one idea. Then another was like the cost of rehab. How much is rehab? The rehab facility. What if you get the
A
damage?
lot,
A
a
lot.
lot, a
I didn't know
lot.
these things. So
Uh,
if you put those statistics in there, then maybe that'll scare the hell out of those kids in the auditorium or the ones reading books say, oh my God, I never thought about this. I could lose my license. My insurance could go up 3 times. I could spend $10,000 on a fine and 20,000 on a lawyer. It's like, oh my, and I make $1.25 working at McDonald's. Yeah. It might hit
I,
home.
I think they make more than that now. But with that
After
said,
taxes, maybe.
in
Yeah.
proportion,
Right.
in
But
proportion.
right. But that's an example of, the writer knows that something is missing, but they don't know what. And that's where the developmental editor can come in and say, okay, I
Pull it
feel your
out.
pain and I can see where this is missing. So here's some ideas we can plug that hole. It works without that hole, but if you want to put some numbers in there or go in a certain way, we can do that too. Another
Mhm.
example is like when they tell stories, and sometimes they don't have any quotes in there, so it really doesn't read like a story. And sometimes I have too many quotes in there, and the story gets bogged down because there's too much back and forth or whatever. So a developmental editor can come in there and say, okay, let's make this better, as you say, because that's our job to make it better. It's like, let's cut out this dialogue because it just doesn't go anywhere and make it shorter, make it tighter, and it'll work a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things is for aspiring author, any author, I don't care where you are in this deal, if you're a newbie or if you've been there, is to let go of some of the stuff that you've worked on and developed and not address, maybe the elephant on the page is whatever you've written is not moving it anywhere. And that's when that's where self-editing will come into play as well. I mean, certainly a development editor is going to be on the lookout for that. And but it's gotta your whether it's dialogue or it's your descriptors or just the general, it's got to move it forward on there. Otherwise, it's wasted words. At least that's my opinion, Dan.
Oh, I agree completely. I'm writing an article
Mm.
now for Substack about I'm writing a new book and I'm posting a lot of the chapters on Substack and LinkedIn to get audience feedback. And I'm
Mhm.
working on a chapter now, and it's like I started a first draft yesterday and I looked at it this morning and I added some statistics and it's sort of getting bogged down. And sometimes you have to
Mhm.
sleep on it. I'm a great
Mhm.
believer in showing it to other people, of course, when it's ready, when you've taken it as good as far as you can go. But sometimes you have to sleep on it. Your subconscious kicks in. And how many times have you been in the shower and you get a great idea? Or you're going for a walk and you get a great idea? Or it's 3 in the morning, which just happens to me, and you wake and say, I have a great idea. I used to write things down, and then I look at them in the morning and be like squiggles, could not read it at all. So now I got
I've
my
done that.
iPhone and I just dictate into my iPhone, and I
Mhm.
talk my idea in there, and I go back to sleep. So you never know when those ideas are going to come. So you got to record them when you can.
And you could, and well, I'm a good one. I carry sticky notes around with me, a pad, so I can put those when I'm away.
Mhm.
But usually, if I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, whatever's the idea, I'm going to go ahead and propel myself up, because I'm figuring I'm going to be up in an hour anyway. Might as well just jump on it. Um,
That is discipline. Do you use colored sticky notes for like different plot points and things?
of of course, I have. And let's talk about that. I have laid out an entire book with sticky notes. What I love about is the portability of those little buggers that you can move them around. But I would have a character, if it was fiction, or certainly a nonfiction is different animals, but same thing. That if I was going to make like it had an interview that I was going to pull quotes from that, that would be one color throughout the book, and it would be a name on it. So, or and it would be one or two words, so I know what the theme was, where I was going. So, and I will literally lay it out. I've done it on doors, I've done it on windows, I've done it on whiteboards. I've done it, laid out books that way and then moving around. And I remember when I used to write money, Dan, several money books, that there was really a logical order things should go in when you're going on this quest, whether it was investing or trying to get your act together. And it was so easy to move those babies around until I knew what day one was supposed to be exactly versus the day five or whatever it was in that area. So that's what I would move around in all the time with that. So we that's a plus on those things. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, and I don't know if we've lost Dan, he seems to have disappeared. Um, and he'll be back on, but what I think is a good idea, as we come forward and talking about, and I'd love to get into writing. How do you write a book really fast? I have been able to write an entire a draft, rough draft. Not that I would be sending to the editor, my editor on top of me, but writing that draft to move off and do that in a week's period of time. We're talking about a really focused arena area where I am not responsible for anything else but writing and I would get to take health breaks, maybe, or go get a mug of tea or iced tea, or and then I would work, 12, sometimes 14 hours, just bang, bang, bang. So I'm a binge writer in this as I move into area and into play and come about. So I have all of those things that come together. So I think we just have to figure out what works for us. But there is kind of an organization that you need to do. And I think that it's important to understand if you're someone who outlines everything. When I wrote nonfiction, and of my 48 books, you know, that 45 of them, no, yeah, 45 of them would be considered nonfiction. And they really, I knew where I was beginning, I knew where I wanted to come in at ending. I knew multiple areas that would be in there. I still view book writing as a puzzle. My framework was kind of in there, but things come in that sometimes you're not sure, or you didn't think about it, or are sure of their placement. And that one of the tricks that I would recommend to all of you, especially if you're writing nonfiction, is you need to go into, whether it's an Amazon or in a bookstore, I don't care where you go, that you need to look at what would be either you want to call them comparable or competitive books. Things that are in the same arena, talking about kind of the thing that you're talking about, your expertise is in. And I would absolutely get into the contents page. What does this book have in it? Have you forgotten anything? Have you forgotten anything? I remember working with a client of mine, and they were involved in their um, money book. It was like a money basic book, not how to invest, not how to go buy stuff, but just awareness and what you need to know. I got a great book to give to someone just graduating, for example, that may be a tad oblivious, or someone who never really was responsible for any of the money movements within the family, and all of a sudden she or he has that responsibility. So that kind of a book. And I remember going through it, and I was looking at the book because I wrote several money books, and I thought, oh my God, you don't have them going through the exercise of checking what their credit report says. Credit reports are important. So there was nothing going on there. And all of a sudden, we had to put together another chapter to make that happen. So that's what's essential, and make that, pull it along. And so we'd all have a happy dance with it as it came together. So I would be looking at that, bringing it about, and just missing a competitive book, and I'm talking nonfiction, not fiction, a competitive book that has a contents page. They used to call them table of contents. We call them just contents now. Is there something in there that you didn't even think about that maybe you should be including in your book that you know quite a bit about? Because those things happen. Hey, Dan, welcome back.
Hey, yeah, sorry about that. My internet went down, but I know you can run the show by yourself, so I wasn't terribly worried, but I felt
No,
guilty about not being there. So
no,
let's pick up
no,
where we
you were
left
back.
off, or start something new, or whatever you want to do. I'm flexible.
Uh, no,
Thanks for holding down the fort.
I stayed in the structure of writing arena. But I think that I would love to talk a little bit about one of the things that I work with, and you do this, I'm sure, in coaching, is getting yourself organized, getting your act together. One of the biggest problems I see, and I can't tell you how many times I have gone through my little lecture, that when I return files to you, would you please note, and I never put a date at the end of the title, I put it right up front.
Hmm.
When I had my fingers on, I put actually JB, it could be 4/4/25. Okay.
Hmm.
That's when I last touch it. You got it. So the instructions are, the rule is, this is what you work on going forward. And invariably, Dan, I don't know how many times you've experienced, all of a sudden, some there they open up another file
Oh,
because they didn't move it. And so when I talk to authors about getting your computer together, and you create a folder just for this book, and in the folder it will be populated with more folders, there is always an old folder. So when I say something back, and now you're going to work on it and maybe send it back to me with a new date on it, maybe your initial on it, so I know that old folder gets put away. I don't tell them to delete it, because there could be a gem in there buried that we did a deletion on, that all of a sudden, whoa, it's time to rebirth it on that. But that is one of the most consistent problems I see with authors, especially this would be more of a new author versus someone who has been to the party many times, because they've already had their hands hit, because they did that. That they all of a sudden they're working on something, and I said, I've been in this paragraph already. What are you doing?
yeah. Yeah, I use something very similar to you. I will say Dan to Judith, chapter 2, and the date. And then you'll respond back to me, Judith to Dan, chapter 2, and the new date. And that way I know that it's my version or your version as well. So that might be a little refinement, but you're right, it is a big bugaboo. And I have one client who insists on putting the date because that's their computer filing system, and I can't break them of it. And, you have to just work with your clients as best they can to make sure there are no errors. Because there's nothing worse than opening up your file and saying, wait a second, this is from 3 weeks ago. What happened to all my changes, all my edits, all my corrections, all the updates? And it's like lost forever. So dating everything. And I know people are going to say, well, the computer makes the date on the file too. Why don't we just do that? It's like, well, you don't see that when you see an attachment on your email. You might see it when you go to, Apple Find or search or whatever. But this is getting really arcane. The other thing that bothers me about, authors, they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to try using Scrivener."
No, 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 don't do
You could
that.
spend your entire life learning how to use Scrivener. There's nothing easier than, say, Word. And I have clients who use Google Docs, which is also pretty cool too. Took a little bit of getting used to, but that's our job as editors. We have to be able to work with Pages or Word or Google Docs. But
Pages
Scrivener,
still out
I'm
there.
sorry.
Pages is still out there, eh, Dan?
Excuse me?
Pages is still out there, huh?
One of my clients just sent me a file in Pages, and I said, like, okay.
Oh boy. Well, an alternative for all our viewers and listeners is that if you like the way the Scrivener, and Dan is so right, you need to have a PhD in how to use Scrivener. There is something called Dabbler that might be a little bit more friendly to you in your organization and pulling together for your fiction writers. So just a thought with that. So Dan, I would love to have some of your tips. When I'm first working with an author, I actually want to spend at least one session to two sessions of just starting to set up the infrastructure.
Hmm.
Because I'm thinking of the branding. I'm actually thinking of I go in thinking of the whole picture. It's just not, it goes back to that little three-letter word that is so crucial, the who.
Mhm.
Um, that who are you trying to track? And I actually, held the mirror in front of a client the other day. I said, so is this book for you or is this for others?
Mhm.
Are you writing this just for you? Or you really want to get it out there, and is there a broader audience? Because if the audience in the who encompasses a lot of other people, your ego has to come on down,
Yeah,
um, and recognize um, that they're going to be the decision maker on whether or not they want to read your book, not you.
right.
And that's always painful.
Yeah, that's a great segue. I have two stories about this, or two tips that would reinforce what you said. The first,
Mhm,
when I have my initial talks with my clients, I do say, "What will this book do for you?" Because
mhm.
that gets them involved. Because everyone has a rut. Everyone's like, "Well, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be wonderful, whatever." And 3 weeks later, saying, "Oh man, why am I doing this? It's a waste of time. I can't believe I'm doing this. How can I quit?" So we have to get them
Yeah.
over that rut. So what I do, I set them up for success early. I say, "What will this book do for you?" And say, "Oh, I'll get more clients. I'll be able to raise my fees. I'll be able to speak. I'll be able to help more people." Whatever the answer is, it's a good answer because that will motivate them when they're 3 weeks or 3 months later, when they've hit the wall and they say, "I don't want to do this anymore." You say, "Well, what about all the people you could be disappointing? What about all the people who won't be helped by your message? What about your fees that, are at this level? Don't you want them to be higher so you can help your family, like you told me in the first week?" So if we get them personally involved, what will the book do for you? That will get them through the rough times. Then, when they're satisfied with that, I use your question: who is this book for, and how will it help them?
Mhm.
And that goes into the first chapter of the book. That's actually a writing assignment there, but it gets some focus. So this book is for everyone. No, no book is for everyone. Well, maybe
No,
football book
no,
is for everyone, but a leadership book, is it for middle managers? Is it for CEOs? Is it for the board of directors? Is it's got to be tight. So we totally agree there. And you got to make it for them. And I'll tell you a story. I'm writing a new book about my cancer journey. And frankly,
Mhm.
my story is interesting, but it's not as interesting as your story, the reader's story, because they're the ones who are personally invested. So I feel like, how can I turn my story into their story? So I would have a chapter, I'll call them blog posts for instance, because they're 500, 250, 500, 750 words. They're short, they're sweet, they're concise, they make a good point. And at the end of the point, I turn it back to them and I have what I call questions for consideration. So I might
Mm.
say, here's how I pump myself up, and here's how I do this, and here's what I say to myself, whatever. And then I'll say questions for consideration. What do you say to yourself to pump you up on to get you through those tough days? And then we say,
Mhm.
well, I don't say anything. Maybe I should say something. I wonder what it'd be. Let me go back and reread Dan's message and say, oh, he says this and he says that, and here's what a nurse said, and here's what this other person we interviewed said. I can use that as a springboard. And now here's my mantra. Here's what I can say to build myself up. And that way I turn all of my stories into stories that they can relate to and build on themselves. So my book becomes their journal or their workbook or their diary, where they can take the lessons that I've learned throughout this journey and help them through their journey as well.
Mhm. Another question, Dan, I ask my clients is what is the intentionality of the book? What is it? Not only who is it for, but what's your intention for the book? And a lot of times people don't even think about that.
What do you mean
It's
by intention?
well, the intentionality is it could be the direction that you're going to take it with marketing. It belongs in a certain niche. And we'll go into that. That you want to, I'm going to use Marilyn Vanderburg, who wrote her book, Miss America by Day. All right.
Hmm.
And she was violated by her father for over a decade. All right. So that the intention of the book was to reach out to those who have also been assaulted, victims of incest, and let them go, one, they're not alone.
Hmm.
You know, two, there's steps that you can take to start your healing process. And even that, and she had a full discussion on do you forgive or not? I
Hmm.
mean, but she had an intention of going out for the who, so it ties in with the who. But so my book's who is it for? It's for women over 45. And what else? What else on that? Who are really closet gamblers. Oh, okay. Now we're talking.
Yeah. One of my friends has an entire series of books now. She stumbled on this. It's like selling with noble purpose. That's her brand, a noble purpose. It's like
Mm,
people who are going into like, I think she was in pharmaceutical sales and she discovered
mhm,
this. It's like,
mm.
oh, I'm trying to make my quota. I'm trying to make money. I'm trying to support
Yeah.
my family. As opposed to, I want to help make sure that somebody's grandmother lives another 10 years. That's a
Mhm,
noble purpose. You
mhm.
know, it's like the old story of, the stonemason in the Middle Ages who say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm cutting a stone. Goes to another stonemason. What are you doing? Oh, I'm building a church. Goes to another stonemason. I'm creating glory to God. So I think that goes toward intentionality of, if you can elevate the idea of your book to be just not about you and about the victim, but about, helping raise consciousness of all women so that no one is ever abused or sits in silence again. So then it becomes a movement. And that might, again, getting through that 3 week or that 3 month lull where you wonder, like, why am I doing this? It takes so much time and effort. Well, I'm doing it to help lots of people so they don't have to go through what I went through.
Mhm. Well, it's also when you clearly identify the who, and what's your intent, what your purpose is for the book, that it keeps you from going off the road as you go forward, which is really important. And I'm going to go back to Marilyn. Marilyn was approached by so many publishers to do her book. She ended up turning them all down. She ended up doing it under her own imprint because she was confident after talking with many of them that they would not let her tell her story the way she wanted to tell it and the
Wow.
way it wanted to be presented. And it really, I mean, it kind of goes back to me when I think about why did I create my own press? Why did I do that? And it involves part of the who, because I've written in like three different segments through my publishing career. And actually four now. Fourth one we just added on. But that to be able to be put on the blinders on and be myopic when you're going forward, I think allows you to create a better book, because you're clearly coming in with stories that are going to connect with who your intended audience is, in that, which I think is essential to do. I remember one of my own personal books, one of my healthcare books. I wrote about maybe 6 books for the healthcare field, and one of my books the title was Sabotage, and this is a book that dealt
Clever.
with conflict. Sabotage. The subtitle, though, was The Promise: How to Deal with Pit Bull, Skunks, Snakes, Scorpions, and Slugs in the Healthcare Workplace. Anyone who saw that knew exactly where I was going. They're there. How do we do with these critters so we can work or make a decision to exit? So, and that book sold, people looked at the cover, they read the back cover. I had 5 questions on the back cover. It was sold. It was done. So, I mean, I think that's what's really important. So as a book coach, coming in the book coach side, I think that's one of the things that we have to do, is to kind of steer people into knowing that they have clearly articulated who the who is, what the purpose of the book is, that we can help them get that structured. So that major marketing piece that a back cover delivers is not violated. And I see that all the time, all the time.
Yeah, I agree completely. I can't tell you how many prospects I've spoken to who are so excited about their work, which is really good. But they say, I have a book inside me, but not just one book. I have like 3 books and a Hollywood movie based on all of this. And I ask them what their idea is, and they can't really give it to me in 1 or 2 sentences. And
I
that's a
know.
shame. So their enthusiasm overwhelms their desires. So it's up to us to get them focused and say, what is your key message? Or in fact, in some cases, they may have a couple of great messages, but those books have already been done to death. Now, granted, you never want to write a book to say there's no other book like this out there, because that means there's no market. But,
Well,
competition is wonderful, but sometimes if your idea isn't unique enough, it's just going
yeah,
to die there.
yeah. Then I get hit with, I think, I'm trying to think of, I was thinking of a genre that you're thinking, my God, do we need another book? And I think in the business field, it would probably be leadership.
Hmm.
And I had a book come in, and it was about leadership, and that was what went through my mind. Oh my God, another leadership. So I always ask the client, what is unique about your book that will separate you and raise you above what else is out there? So
Yeah.
tell
I,
me.
I had a client last year who wrote a book about leadership, and I had the exact same thought as you did. And as I started working with her and going through her outline, it was more about conflict resolution. She loved going into dicey situations and getting both sides to come together. And the 10 chapters we wrote had a story about 2 people who were in conflict for any number of reasons, and how she went in there and diffused the situation and found agreement. And there were 10 principles on how she did that. So we start with a broad category of leadership because that's what Amazon wants us to do. But then we narrow it down to what really is your specialty. Because if you are a leadership consultant, your prospect, you can say, okay, you and 50 other people I've spoken to, what makes you different? You say, well, I can do conflict resolution. And they say, oh, we need that, or we don't need that. But at least you know that you're not going to go up there and doing leadership 101 and telling people to like manage by walking around or some other
Oh,
trite thing
yeah,
that.
please. Yeah, yeah, please. Well, in this case of the book I was telling about leadership, I mean, I was struggling. I finally said, where does your email come from? And he says, well, look at me. Look at me. I'm half black and I'm half Japanese. And I said, and the point is, he says, I'm different and I'm a maverick. And the word he had in his email was Ronin, the Japanese maverick warrior.
Hmm.
I got it. And that's how we wrote the book for leadership, because this guy had heavy duty CIA background. Plus, he created a whole global security system for a Fortune 10 company. Okay. So
Mhm.
then I could take it and run.
Yeah. Exactly. I think both of our stories are illustrative of the added
Mm,
value we bring to someone who says, well, why am I different? There are a million books about leadership. What makes my book different? Professor
mhm.
Smith at Harvard wrote the encyclopedia about this book. Why would anyone write my book? Well, Professor Smith doesn't know anything about your niche, your specialty. You could be an expert on small business imports and such that no one else could possibly write that book. Professor Smith couldn't write that book, and people are into small business imports. Now, this is funny. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they're talking to a guy who has created a talking Jesus plush doll that he imports from Japan. And of course, it was about the tariffs, which are big news today. And I thought, oh my God, this guy, he was talking about how he's going to get killed in all of this because, his import fees are only going to be like $60,000 more than he thought it was. And how's that going to affect the price of his doll? And he could write a book about all this and the small business entrepreneurs who are going to pay and, what it means and how they do the math and the numbers and how they can run their businesses. And that's a perspective that someone at Harvard does not have. These small entrepreneurs have
No,
a huge
no,
market.
no. And I want to kudos to the entrepreneurs and the people because, and I had a client who went through a devastating embezzlement from an
Mm.
internal employee who she trusted explicitly,
Oh, yeah.
considered a friend, had had for a gazillion years. She ended up sending her to jail. She had the FBI involved with the damage that she had done. This is a woman who never went to college. And her fear, this is the fear, the gremlins that come in. Her fear was because she did not have a PhD, or she was not, or an MBA, or she wasn't riding with someone who bought the alphabet soup to the party, that no one would pay any attention. And I remember just sitting down. I reached out and grabbed her hand and I said, Cheryl, if my company was in trouble, if I was suspicious of embezzlement or I needed to find out what was going on, let me tell you, the trench I want to get in is with someone like you who's been there, done that, and not dealt with it from the academic ivory tower, period. But her fear was because she didn't have all the credentials. How could she write about it? And I said, you do have all the credentials.
Yeah. Life
So,
experience is a credential, and
oh,
you
it's huge.
get that in college.
It's huge. Dan, I think, before we go, we have got to talk about AI a little bit.
But
There's the fear, there's someone, I can't remember. They did everyone says, well, use AI for research. That's kind of a safe one. Use AI for research. Turned out it was all bullshit. It was, it was AI made up research.
Yeah, that happened to me. I had a client who wanted me to go
Okay.
through 700 blog posts and organize them so we could write a book about it. And I figured, "Oh, I'll let AI do it." And it came up
Okay.
with like 10 different topics and 10 titles for each topic. And they were all good and they all made sense. In fact, they made a lot more sense than what I remember reading. It was like much clearer than the way he was writing. And I clicked on a couple of links. The links did not exist. AI made it all up. Tell you another funny story. I had a client writing a book about financial planning for women, and I asked AI to write the back cover copy just for those words, back of financial planning for successful women, and it came up with a beautiful copy that I would not change a word of, except for the fact that it quoted Susie Orman, who gave a great quote, but it was totally made up because the book hadn't even been written. Susie Orman hadn't said that. She hadn't seen the But AI was smart enough to think about who can I quote who's well respected among women financial planners? Susie Orman. So those are some horrible stories, but there are some good stories too. And I'll tell you about my addiction client again, because I know
Mm,
nothing about addiction. So I went to AI and I said, can you outline a book about addiction? And it did. It's like, what is it? How do you spot it? How can you peer pressure? It gave 10 or 15 chapters that were spot on. And I said, okay, what if you were doing a speech to a high school audience? Can you give me 10 titles for speeches that would really rivet an audience? Because frankly, the book chapter titles were good, but they weren't terribly exciting. So I thought this would be another way to get the material. And sure enough, it gave me, things about peer pressure, about addiction, about recovery, relapsing. I never thought about these things because I'm not in that community. But I could help my client by saying, hey, here's some topics. Which topics resonate with you? What could you write about? What could you talk about? And then he gets excited, say, oh, let's do this one. So he doesn't know that it's not for my own brain. And frankly, it shouldn't even matter because there are tools out there. We've used tools forever, whether it be Grammarly or Excel or spell checkers or thesauruses to help fill in the blanks that we don't know. AI is taking it to a new level. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. You could hire
Huh?
an intern. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. So it's up to you
Yeah.
to double check and use your experience to say, this is
Mhm.
off kilter for what I'm looking for, or this is spot on. I hadn't thought about this, or this just saves me a lot of time. So I think it's inevitable. I mean, I spoke to a person who taught in the business school at a small college in Michigan, and she told me that they no longer teach business writing because they think AI is going to take it all over. And she said, it's sort of like the slide
That
rule. We don't teach slide rules anymore. We just know that Excel or spreadsheet is going to take care of all the math. So why bother with the math? You and I may think that's lazy. I can see the look on your face. You definitely think it's lazy. And I remember my fifth grade teacher saying, if I wake you up and shake you awake at 3 in the morning, I say 7 times 7, you better say 49. And I could do
exactly. But my attitude is, I think
that.
I see, I'm all for using tools,
Yeah.
and things, but you better be smart enough, tuned in enough
Mhm,
to
mhm.
do your own spot checking,
Exactly.
uh, and catching stuff because it is your name. Your name goes on all this stuff. And
Oh,
I know in talking with someone that she was so excited when she uploaded her manuscript and the way it came out with some ideas and stuff. And I said it was okay for you to put up your unpublished manuscript because now it's training. Realize it's a trainer tool now. It's gone in there, it's in the system, and that's okay with you. And it wasn't okay with her.
mhm.
That she was not ready to reveal some of her unique things that she's ready to do. So I said, you need to be careful. But you have to become your own watchdog, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's where expertise comes in. That's like, the old story of, Picasso charging $10,000 for a little squibble he made in 2 seconds. And the woman says, it only took you 2 seconds. And madam, it took me 60 years. It's the plumber who knows which nut to turn at what angle to turn it and for how much torque.
Mhm.
Otherwise, everything explodes, and that's why they can charge so much per hour. It's the same with us. We know the intuitive feel of what works and what doesn't work based on our
Mhm.
experiences. AI doesn't know that. They can come close, and sometimes they can hit the nail on
Mhm.
the head. Sometimes they can be a million miles off, and that's okay because that's what our clients are paying us for, to know the fine tuning of it. I think Malcolm
Mhm.
Gladwell wrote a book about this, where an art expert could look at, the real painting and a fake painting and know immediately which one was the fake. They just have this
Mhm.
intuitive feel. You and I and other book coaches and developmental editors have worked with so many books over our lifetimes. We know what's going to work and what's not going to work, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And AI isn't quite there yet, but they're doing some good things. That's all I can say.
It will keep on morphing as we go along. So, well, I always, since you do your writer and your own writing, and I think it's always good. I mean, when I wrote nonfiction, Dan, I outline things.
Oh yeah.
When okay, so because for me, this is like a puzzle we're putting
Oh
together,
yeah.
and I'm
Love
gonna
puzzles.
get those around, and I always swear I've got a puzzle right now working. I know there's border pieces missing. I know that they have purposely removed them from me, and of course I know in the end they're there. But with that said, I, I would always outline my nonfiction, of which, of my 48 books, 40, 43, 45 are nonfiction. And so I always knew what the beginning is, and I always knew what the end. Pretty much knew a lot of the stuff in between, but I always flexible. Authors be flexible, flexible for the serendipity to drop in. That that awesome idea that drops in that you see something and a trigger happens and you know you're going to include it. We all have experienced that kind of stuff. But when I'm doing fiction, and I know we're kicking off and I have an idea where we're going, I just don't know what the journey is going to be when we get there. Because I'm a pantser and that characters talk to you. They will let you know what you're supposed to do, and you have to trust that. That's my experience. That is my experience.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you a fiction and a nonfiction example. For nonfiction, I have my clients on a very strict schedule because these are big business card books. These are branding books. These are books that are designed to help people get business. So it's 10 chapters because frankly, people don't want to read anymore. And those first chapter, okay, the 8 chapters in the middle are the problems that you like to solve, that you can make money on, that you are not time vulture, they attract the right clients, and these are the biggest problems that your clients have. The first chat, and it shows how you solve them. So case study, shows you examples, statistics, makes you the expert. So you get the credibility. First chapter is the overview of the problem and your signature story. So they get to know, like, and trust you. The last
Okay.
chapter is the call to action chapter, where you
Yep.
ask for the order, or if you're a little bit shy about that, or if your industry doesn't allow that, it's a summary or it's a look to the future. That's it.
Hmm.
And then just do detail outline the others. The other idea
Hmm.
for the fiction, I'm with you. I was with a friend of mine. We had a writing challenge. You know, every day we're going to write a short play for 15 minutes based on a prompt.
Whoa.
And
Whoa.
after a few weeks, I ran out of prompts. So I got the New York Times book review, and I saw the bestsellers, and they have a little one-line description about the
Mhm.
book.
It's
And I thought,
great.
oh,
Great.
here's a book about a woman goes missing on a boat, and they can't find her. I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, and I used that as a starting point for a 15-minute play, and it turned into a screenplay after 30 days that went in a totally different direction because at that point I read her book, and we were like miles apart. So you and I could start with the same prompt and wind up in radically different places because, as you
Oh
said,
yeah.
characters tell you where they want to go.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've been in writing classes too where they throw the prompt, the candles lit sometimes, and the fruits on the table, or there's a bouquet, or there's something out there, and we're instructed to use a couple of elements in front of us to kick it off. And or I had like a bingo card with all kinds of things on it, from a men's speedo suit to who knows. And I would have people close their eyes and go ding ding ding. All right, what did you hit? Those three things. You have to use those in the first two paragraphs. All right, and we're off and running. And where that there's just something, a juiculating that happens that ends up opening up the valves and can take you in another direction. You have no idea where that's going to land. No idea.
And that's the fun of it. And that works in nonfiction too. I'm sure you've
Mhm.
seen business parable books like The Go-Giver or Who Moved My Cheese or The One-Minute Manager or the things like that. I love writing those kinds of books. In fact, when I ghostwrite, those are the books I write now. I don't want to write any more big business card books. They're just too boring for me. But to write a story about that contains your 5 principles with characters and a plot line and a through line. That's fun for me because, like you, I like doing puzzles too. In fact, I was almost ashamed to admit it until I realized that lots of people do jigsaw puzzles. I started doing them during COVID when I was stuck in the house all day. And so this is fun because people like you and me like creating order out of chaos. And we see those 1,000 pieces of puzzle pieces, all different shapes and colors. We said, okay, I'll start on the border first. Then I'll work on the red pieces. Then I'll work on the blue pieces. Then there's some other signal in there that tells me what else to do. It's the same with writing. It's like, okay, here are all of her ideas. Let's sort of figure out where they all go, in what order, and what makes the most sense. So we have the most convincing conversation or argument, so to speak, that convinces the reader to buy in.
Mhm. We have like 90 seconds to go. I would love to have you come back and kiss on Substack, what you're doing there. So you're using Substack to kind of dangle this in front of potential beta readers to see if it's juicy enough that gets their attention. What are we doing?
Okay. I've been on Substack for about a month, which means I know next to nothing, and I'm
You're
still
a
learning
newbie.
about it. So
Okay.
give me a couple of weeks to get, the blind man
Ah,
touching the elephant. But I'm posting there and on LinkedIn my 500, 700 word pieces to see
mhm.
if it resonates, and darn sure it resonates. I got like 1,000 views on LinkedIn and dozens of comments for my first piece. And
Oh,
doctors are linking to me on Substack, which is really an ego trip because these cancer doctors want to find out what I know. So it's a way of getting feedback and seeing if your ideas work. Plus, if people say, "Here are my experiences," then you have content for your book. Or they say, "This is a great idea. This will help inspire a lot of people." Now I have blurbs for my book. So it's working out in ways that I never really thought. And I'm sure in 4 or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I'm going to know a lot more now than I do today because it's a totally new thing. In fact, a lot of people don't even know what Substack is. My publisher
well,
didn't know what Substack was. So
they will learn. Yeah, they will
we'll
learn. So
learn.
with that, Dan, it is a wrap. So thank you so much for being with us on the Author You, Your Guide to Book Publishing podcast. And we would definitely will have to do this again.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure playing with you in your writer's playground. Thank you, Judith.
Exactly. All right, take care, everyone. We'll see you next week for another show, another topic, another adventure.